West Virginia remains in the news, and not just for players getting out of the program, but because their former coach Bob Huggins wants back in. What?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He's Isaac Shade, and we got a fantastic show for you all today. And we got to start with one of the more baffling news stories that I did not expect to see coming out of this weekend. Bob Huggins, the, of course, former longtime head coach at the West Virginia Mountaineers, who lost his job about a month ago and apparently didn't resign. The conversation that we had at the time, Isaac, talking about Bob Huggins, was after his second DUI, particularly horrific DUI, mind you. He blew over a .2, was unaware of his surroundings, didn't know that he was in Pittsburgh. Like it was a really messy situation, and ultimately led to him losing his job shortly afterwards. In West Virginia at first started to do a national search for their new head coach, ultimately decided they wanted to try to keep their core team together, hired assistant coach Josh Eilert, brought him in, or kept him, I guess, and tried to keep the rest of the team around, managed to keep Jesse Edwards, managed to keep Kerr Kriisa, still lost a lot of other talent. And it kind of felt like the news cycle was finally starting to die out a little bit. Trey Mitchell goes to Kentucky. Jose Perez is still available. Joe Toussaint goes to Texas Tech. And we're starting to feel like, okay, this is kind of a story that's dying. And then suddenly, over the weekend, a report comes out that Bob Huggins is claiming he did not resign from his post, that he is currently in rehab, which I hope is true for his sake and his family's sake. That's very good news, but that he intends to leave rehab and then just come back to his job as the head coach at West Virginia, which West Virginia has quickly released a statement saying that that's not going to happen, obviously for very obvious reasons. But this is a really weird situation. And before we kind of get into the weeds, Isaac, I just kind of want to know what your initial reaction was to this, and this kind of, I mean, ultimately sad story of what's going on at West Virginia right now.
I mean, that word you just used, Andy, was my kind of reaction to it. Is it's like, I was already sad. It was just an unfortunate happening. It's obviously a bad look. But man, it's just like, and I know in the days to come we'll probably learn more. But my word, it's like, you just got to know when to walk away. I mean, I like the statement. Here's his initial statement that we got on June 17th.
Right.
It says, quote, Mountaineer Nation, today I have submitted a letter to President Gordon or Gee, I've never known, whatever, and Vice President and Director of Athletics Ren Baker, informing them of my resignation and intention to retire as head men's basketball coach at West Virginia University, effective immediately, not 5 weeks, 5 years, whatever it is. And then this all comes out, and it's sad because then West Virginia obviously has to come back out with a statement, and it's just like, and they come back and say that it's, quote, completely factually inaccurate, right, what Coach Huggins is saying. And so, Andy, I think my initial reaction to this, as I learned of it Saturday evening, was that it just takes a sad happening and makes it even sadder. I mean, I was just trying to think of just even words worse than that. Not like negative, but just like Eeyore, right? Like it's just, man, it's such an unfortunate thing. And I know there was something with his wife and other stuff. And it's just like, Coach, you have made these errors and mistakes. It's not the first time. It's time to just pack your bags and walk away. And I hate that because he's one of the winningest coaches of all time in our sport. And you don't want to ever see that go down. But Andy, you talked about Coach Eilert and trying to keep this whole thing in together, the roster. And like you were saying, like I said last week on the show, I think one of the shows where we weren't together, like it's funny to me that he was able to keep the transfers in Creesa and Edwards, but then lost some of the guys that were already on the roster. I thought it'd be the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the biggest things for me that I initially thought of is this just takes what's already a difficult situation for an interim head coach and Coach Eilert and makes it even more difficult on him to have any kind of success in the best conference in all of college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I'm at too, is like, I feel bad for many people involved. I don't feel that bad for Bob Huggins. Like, I hope he gets the help that he needs, but coming back with this is just,
it's so self-inflicted.
He did this to himself. He caused the problems that led to him losing his job. And now he's causing more problems for Ren Baker, for Gordon Gee, for Josh Eilert. Like, he's causing direct problems for people that he, in theory, should have had a good relationship with, or people that were, he was close with. I don't know what the individual relationships were there, but he's trying to burn it all down. And for what? And I think that's the part that's really baffling to me, is like, what is he trying to gain? I have a really hard time believing that Bob Huggins believes in more than 1% chance that he's going to get his job back. I can't believe that he actually believes he's going to be the head coach at West Virginia next year. I don't. So does that make this move him trying to get more money? Because if he's just transparently trying to get a settlement out of West Virginia or some kind of financial gain, like, that's almost worse. Like, I obviously, I don't want to pretend to know his financial situation, but it's public knowledge how much money he's made over his career, and he shouldn't need more money. And if he's trying to squeeze more money out of the school, that's just depressing. But if he also firmly believes he should be reinstated as the head coach because he didn't resign, I don't know, it feels like we're missing something. And if we're not missing something, then I'm just mystified as to why this is happening, because I don't understand. Like, if West Virginia really made some kind of mistake where they interpreted something he said as a resignation and he didn't actually resign, which I don't think is likely, but it is possible. Yeah. You go into the weeds, like maybe the communication actually came from his wife's account instead of his account, and that means that legally there's some complicated things that could come out of this, but at the end of the day, West Virginia is just going to fire him. Like, I don't understand. Like, they have every cause in the world to just fire him. So I don't know why he thinks, well, because I didn't resign, I get my job back. Like, no, they're just going to fire you. Is that really how you want this to end? Is that you demand your job back and they say no and fire you? Because if all he's trying to do is force them to, if all he's trying to do is force them to fire him, like, fine, they will. But is that really the way the story needs to end? Because I say no, it should have ended 6 weeks ago. Like, it should be over, but it's not for some reason.
And one of the things you and I talked about on the Monday show initially after his, I guess not his resignation, after his resignation, was that we were hopeful that, as we looked into the future 5-10 years, we could see a world in which there would be restoration, where he had gone through the things he needed to go through in his life, as you talked about earlier, that then allowed him to be part of this community, be part of like talking to people going through similar things that could say, hey, you're headed down a path that you just don't want to, and whether it's with AA or whatever, to be able to just be a help and a beacon. But Andy, I like this move. Delay, if that's ever going to be a thing, it delays it by at least a couple more years. Right. It's a huge step backwards. And like, for somebody who is an alum, who's from this area, it's like, buddy, you might have to skip town. Like, I don't know that Morgantown's going to want you anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen somebody who was as beloved in their area. Like, one of the beautiful things about college athletics in general is how revered certain people can get within their own community. And like, Bob Huggins' connection to Morgantown is among the ones that you talk about. It's like Mark Few at Gonzaga and like Krzyzewski at Duke. Like, there's all sorts of, Roy Williams at Carolina, like iconic figures in their specific communities. And Bob Huggins seems to be trying to fast track destroying that reputation as fast as possible. And it's again, for a game that doesn't appear to be there to me. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a reason that he would torpedo his entire relationship with this community that he's been a part of for decades in order to still not get his job back and make money that he doesn't need. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me.
And then looking ahead to the future, where AD Ren Baker has already talked about, okay, the decision to go with the interim and Coach Eilert, and then we're going to relaunch our like national search, next coaching carousel in next spring, March, whenever it is. Andy, if you're a coach from without the West Virginia community, I'm pretty sure you're going to think twice about like, do I want to get involved in this Hatfield McCoy, whatever it is? Like, do I want to be part of some potential family feud where I might get thrown in the middle of this? Like, I know it's a Big 12 team and there's history and Kevin Pittsnoggle and all this great stuff, but I don't know that I would want in on that.
Agreed. If I was if this lingers into February or March in any capacity, I think it really hamstrings their ability to hire the top tier coaches that are available. And that would be a really devastating thing for the Mountaineers.
Well, Andy, we got to turn our attention to some hopefully happier matters, to two young men who probably will not go to West Virginia. And that's Cooper Flagg and Cam Boozer. Cooper Flagg had a dominant performance at Peach Jam this past week and has put the basketball world on notice. Puts him in competition with Cam Boozer atop the 2025 recruiting rankings. Andy, we want to have a discussion in just a second. Who would you rather have right now to start a team? More on that coming up in just a second. But first, we got to tell you that today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. Folks, these shorts are going to make you look good this summer, whatever it is that you're doing. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of like stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed that issue by coming up with what they call cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches to get you a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs also use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. And folks, I don't know about you, but I need that all summer long. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter promo code lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or promo code lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler. I've been using mine, Andy. I love it. I think it's great. Folks, you're not going to want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. Hey, thanks for being with us on another week of Locked On College Basketball. It's great to have you everydayers in here with us, even as we get into the middle of July, baby. We keep on trucking. So make sure to stick with us for another great week of shows. All right, Andy, let's turn our attention from what's already happening in college basketball to a couple guys that will be joining us in the fall of 2025. For a while now, Cameron Boozer, the son of Duke legend Carlos Boozer, has been I don't know if I'd say runaway, but the consensus number one player in the class. And that was true as of just a couple of weeks ago at all four of the major recruiting services. 247, ESPN, Rivals, and On3. All four of them had him as the number one player. But Andy, Cooper Flagg has now snagged the number one spot away from him at two of those four. So Boozer maintains the number one position at ESPN and 247, but Cooper Flagg, my friend, has switched with him at On3 and Rivals, meaning both of these dudes are now number one at two of the four recruiting services. So Andy, I want to ask you this question right now as of, like mid-June, no, July. Hello, it's summer. I don't know when it is, and that's a good problem. Mid-July 2023, and I know we've still got 2 years till these guys come play in the college ranks. But which of them right now, these two guys that are both forwards, both 6'8", both dominant players, who would you rather start a team with right now as your cornerstone?
It's a really tough question, and these guys have both looked so fantastic. I'm going to go with Cooper Flagg. I'm going to go with the guy who's been a little bit better lately, and I think some people will say, oh, it's recency bias, but like you're talking about high school kids who are growing and maturing and improving. Like I want the guy who's the best right now, because in a year from now, it might be different. Boozer might kind of come back and show some more skills, maybe more facilitation skills, more consistent outside shooting, whatever, and kind of put himself back in that conversation. And to be clear, Cam Boozer is excellent. I don't think that he's got a lot of flaws in his game. There's a reason that he is number one or number two in every single ranking. And he's been in that spot for years. I mean, it feels like decades. I mean, honestly, it feels like he's been the guy we've been talking about for years, and he's still years away from even being in college. But Cooper Flagg's performance at Peach Jam this last week was just extraordinary. Putting up near quadruple doubles, blocking basically every shot in existence. His facilitation skills were off the charts. That really stood out to me, of a 6'9" kid who could pick apart defenses with his passing, with his shooting, with his scoring. Like, you often see, and this isn't really true of Boozer either, but you often see guys who dominate just by kind of dominating. Like, they go through guys, they just look like the more imposing physical threat. And there's something to be said for that. If you're the most athletic kid in high school, that still means something. But like you can see with Flagg and with Boozer, to an extent, they have the ability to impact the game, not just because of their athleticism. And Flagg really, really showed that in these games at Peach Jam. I mean, again, his facilitation, the 3-point shooting, he looked more consistent as an outside shooter than Boozer. And when you consider how valuable of a skill that is, not just at the college level, but of course at the NBA level as well, I think that's why I would lean with Flagg. But it's not going to surprise me at all if Boozer kind of swings the pendulum back in his direction between now and the fall of 2025. Because like you said, there's a long time between now and then.
There really is. And Andy, what I love is, with the new CBA that the NBA is putting into place, it's guaranteed that we're going to get these guys. Yeah. And so I'm really looking forward to that year. You know what? Since you're going with Flagg, I'm going to take Mr. Boozer.
Do it.
I agree with you. I think there are things that they each do better right now than the other, but it's like their Peach Jam numbers it's like, where Flagg is number one, Boozer's number two, and where Boozer's number one, Flagg's number two. In a lot of, not everything, obviously, but I think for their younger development right now at the high school and then moving into college ranks, I want the guy that's got the pedigree. Yeah. I just think it's an unfair advantage that he didn't ask for, but heck, if you got it, smoke it, right? And so, dude, just having a dad like Carlos Boozer that has been a consummate teammate, a consummate professional, like just the things that they've been able to instill in both Cam and Caden, his twin brother, I think just gives him the slight edge. And again, that's unfair, but I mean, it is what it is, because this is, hearing NBA scouts talk. I mean, not that I'm in direct conversation with NBA scouts, but like one of the things they talk about is pedigree. Yeah, and not that Flagg doesn't have any of that. There is some basketball in his family, obviously, but his dad sure ain't Carlos Boozer, right? And so, just because of that, I got to give the edge to him. But Andy, here's what I love about this whole thing is what a great debate this is for us to have, like to have, how it just doesn't feel like, so it feels like we either have like one clear cut number one dude in a class, or like 4 or 5 that could be it. And I know we've got some others like Koa Pete and Darren Peterson in this class, but I mean, it's just fun, man, because we're going to be able to have this conversation and watch these two young men, both of whom should be wildly terrific. And listen, there's a chance they both wind up at the same school. Hello, and it seems to be leaning that way. I wouldn't be surprised, but in the NIL era, we can't make those assumptions, I guess, of where they'll wind up. But I just love all these fun similarities, like similar size, same position. They both have twin brothers. They, it's just, man, it's super fun. And that's what I love is I would love either one of them to help me start a team. But boy, I cannot wait to watch the progression of both these young men.
Well, I think too, like it's so we're kind of coming out of the COVID era where the high school classes were weaker. Like that was just a known fact about class of 2023. This incoming class is considered historically weak, and we didn't have these conversations. I don't remember us debating Isaiah Collier or DJ Wagner. Like, I know it was a conversation that happened and people talked about it. And certainly those two guys both have opportunities to be extremely good at USC and Kentucky next year. But like, it wasn't really talked about as much with that class. And the COVID years really kind of hampered some of the development for 23, I think to an extent. 24 and 22 was hit by it a little bit as well. But I think 25 kind of feels like almost we're kind of getting out of it a little bit. And the development, I mean, Boozer and Flagg are like you mentioned, there's others. Coapete is a good one as well. Like, there's a really dominant high school class. And I think there's a larger conversation that you and I are planning to have eventually about just how coaches are turning away from high school recruiting. And if you're not a top 10 or 15 recruit in your class, some of the coaches aren't going to give you as much attention because they're more focused on adding via the transfer portal. And there's like reasons that make sense why these coaches are doing that. And it's kind of a whole thing. But when you have these just like dominant high school players, like more people are paying attention to Flagg and Boozer, which means more people are watching their teams, which means more teams are watching the other players in that class. And so you get more exposure, you get more interest. And I think we're kind of, I think that this class, again, I'll use the pendulum example again, is kind of a great way for us to sort of swing back towards like watching priority high school recruits. And I think that combined with the fact that NBA TV started showing Peach Jam, which was a huge thing. Like the Peach Jam used to be this kind of like niche, like thing that a bunch of basketball nerds went to and nobody else really cared about or paid attention to. And it's still slowly getting more attention. Like, it's not like everybody was watching it, but a lot more people are paying attention to Peach Jam, and a lot more people are paying attention to some of the summer circuits. And I think these two guys are really helping to kind of pull us out of this like anti-high school era that we've been in and kind of push us back towards that. And I think that's a really fun aspect of us getting to, debate these two kids, because they're doing a lot for high school basketball. There's a lot of pressure put on them, but they seem up to the task.
And I think, Andy, the underdeveloped, the other word I would add to that is underscouted, because we not only did they not have the development, you talked about the eyeballs or lack thereof that was on a lot of those classes. That's absolutely true. We and people that scout these guys and recruit them weren't able to see them as well or as often. And I think that plays into it as well. And so I'm with you. So glad we're able to kind of come out of that and really start seeing these young men show what they can do. It's a lot of fun to get back to that.
Well, Isaac, it's Monday, and on Monday we end every single show with a good old-fashioned six-pack, but today we're doing it a little bit differently. It's a summer league version of our normal six-pack. We're going to discuss 6 college basketball players who were drafted last year, who were signed last year, who are playing in the summer league, who we think are killing it so far in Las Vegas. We're going to get to all that coming up right after this. All right, folks, thanks for hanging out with us here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Andy Patton and Isaac Shade here, closing out Monday with our normal six-pack instead of talking about transfer portal updates and recruiting updates, because quite honestly, there just haven't been a whole lot of those. As we are in mid-July, we're finally starting to see things slow down a little bit. So we want to take a look at Summer League, which has just started. We're in about the second week of that, and kind of take a look back at some of the guys that we talked about on this podcast, that we talked about with our good friend Leaf Tulane of the Locked On NBA Big Board, some guys we scouted, some guys we discussed who have really been just doing really well to start out the Summer League. Again, most guys have only played 1 or 2 games, so we're very early into that process. But Isaac, I'm going to give you a chance to just pick out of these 6 guys that we have here for our six-pack who you want to talk about and kind of highlight so far in Summer League.
Yeah, well, and I want to make sure everyone kind of knows there was, through the main part of last week, we had the California Classic and the Salt Lake City Summer League. Those were kind of just like, it's almost like the Grapefruit League, like for spring training, where it's not everybody. But now, starting last Friday, is the full-on 30-team Las Vegas official NBA Summer League that we get all the way up through the champion. And so those games that started Friday, those are the games you should really be looking at, folks, for like, what are we doing here? We're getting Wemby and everyone else in now. So anyway, Andy, to answer your question, I want to take Keontae George. I loved watching him last year at Baylor. I know because for some people he was like, this dude could be freshman of the year nationally, right before we started seeing like what Brandon Miller was doing and some of that other stuff. But goodness gracious. I love, because he had to share that load with that loaded Baylor backcourt of he and Adam Flagler and CJ Cryer, amongst others. But now, man, getting out here with the Jazz in Summer League, he's putting up some numbers. Andy, let me just give you some of these. I know we don't want to just read stats at folks, but these kind of were eye-popping to me. Against Oklahoma City, 18 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, 3 steals. Against the Clippers, 33 points, 10 assists, Andy, 2 boards and 1 steal. By the way, he averaged 2.8 assists per game at Baylor. So great to see him jump up on some of that. And then against the Sixers, 14 points, 3 boards, 4 assists. And so, man, just love him getting to show out a little bit, show some of what all of what he can do. And I know our guy, you talked about Leaf. I know Raphael over at Locked on NBA Big Board is really high on Keontae. And so I love this for Raphael as well, because he's getting to celebrate that. Andy, what about you? Who do you want to take off of this list?
Well, I want to talk about another guard who was picked in the top half of the first round, a guard who I think many people expected we would see him develop more so in the NBA because he just didn't get those opportunities in college, and that's Anthony Black. Anthony Black, of course, at Arkansas, one of the things with the Hogs last year, they didn't have a lot of floor spacing, and there was a lot of conversation, again, Leaf and Raphael and everybody talked about this extensively on Locked on NBA Big Board, that Anthony Black, his best skill is driving to the basket and using those lanes and getting to the hoop. And he didn't really get to do that at Arkansas because they just smashed everything in because they didn't have floor spacers. And Orlando's only played 1 game as we're recording this right now. In that 1 game, he had 17 points on 7 of 10 shooting. He had 5 assists. He had 5 rebounds. He had 3 steals. So no debate, it was an awesome performance. But beyond just the box score, watching the game, you could clearly see a player who was so confident. He had the ability to get to the rim. He knew when to drive. He knew when to distribute the ball. He knew when to step back and shoot. Like, you could see his processing is really at an elite level. His basketball IQ is through the roof. And again, he just felt like the kind of player that was going to thrive in an NBA offense. 1 game is not enough to definitively say that that's the case, but I got to say it was a pretty darn good start.
Man, absolutely. Plus the hair. It's just so great. Of course. Andy, one of my favorites in college last year, somebody that I was sad didn't get drafted, is Colin Castleton out of Florida. Shouts to our guy, Brandon Olson, the host of Locked On Gators. So far in 2 games for the Lakers, he's averaging 17 points, 10.5 boards, 4.5 assists, Andy, potentially overlooked part of his game, and shooting 66% from the field. Man, if he could just find a nice spot for himself there with the Lakers, that could be really encouraging to see. And so shouts to Colin Castleton. Keep it going, buddy.
Yeah. Castleton, one of the best undrafted free agents so far that we've seen in Summer League. And I want to move on to talk about not an undrafted guy, but a second-round guy. And guess what? It's another guy from Arkansas. We're going to make friends with all the Hogs fans out there because I'm going to talk about Jordan Walsh here. Jordan Walsh with the Boston Celtics. Really, really phenomenal start for him. 18 points and 5 rebounds with 2 steals in his first game with the Celtics. The key there, though, 4 of 6 shooting from beyond the arc. That was the biggest knock on Jordan Walsh. Jordan Walsh was an elite on-ball defensive player. He was a good help defender. He's a high-level athlete. The scoring was just a big enigma. Boston drafted him kind of not knowing what they were going to get from him on the offensive side of the ball. Of course, he was very young. And so I think that there was some optimism that, hey, similar to Anthony Black in a bit of a different way. Obviously, Anthony showed a lot more offensive skill at Arkansas than Walsh did, but like, you could kind of project that he would thrive in a system that maybe gave him more freedom, more room, more space to operate. And mostly catch and shoot threes for Walsh in this first game, but he did not look like somebody who was drafted without a lot of shooting skill. He looked like somebody who is ready to knock down open threes. And if he can be that, he's automatically a 3-and-D rotation player at minimum. Minimum, he's that. Maximum, he's a guy who really, really shines as a second-round pick. And I think it's possible that he could develop into like a really, really good NBA rotation player. But even if he just hits 3-pointers at a semi-decent clip, he's going to be a guy who probably outperforms his second-round projections.
And I hope he does, because I'd have to take some egg on my face on that one. I said that Jordan Walsh should go back to school. Andy, let's go down to Phoenix, where the Suns got Toumani Camara out of Dayton with the 52nd pick in the draft. Man, I tell you what, the Suns are going to be legit this year. So going to have to see what Kamara can do to break that rotation, and we'll see what goes there. But in the Suns' first summer league game, had 20 points, 8 boards. He's a 6'8" forward, Kamara is, who had 14 and 8 at Dayton. And so it would be nice to see him be able to carve out a little space for himself there in the Suns rotation. If not, there's opportunities for development and moving forward as a second round guy. Andy, wrap it up. Who's our last one?
I'm going to go back into the first round here with Jaime Jaquez for the Miami Heat, a guy that everybody kind of just immediately was like, yep, that's the fit for him. Like Miami is the spot for him. They have roles open for what his skill set is. It seems like he's going to be very valuable there. Of course, in a few months, he might be in Portland whenever the Damian Lillard trade finally happens. Who knows if that ends up being the case or not. But Jaquez, 22 points and 3 boards in his first summer league game. And it took him a little bit to get going. And he was admittedly not as good in his second summer league game, but a guy that I think is really going to stand out. And again, I think the NBA spacing is going to help him. Very good driver. The 3-point shooting is an area that he needs to improve and show some consistency there. And I think he will. I have a lot of confidence that he's a good enough shooter to improve as an NBA level 3-point shooter. But even without that, he's a really good driver, good defensive player, high basketball IQ. And I think he's really going to fit Miami's system well. And I'm excited to see what that looks like as we get into the regular season with him.
I am with you there. So, folks, that's just 6 people out of Summer League who we're enjoying right now. We want to know who you think is shining, who's got that come up going on at Summer League. Make sure you're checking in on that. Andy, got to recommend a book series to you that my wife Maggie and I just finished on some travels today. The Beartown series by Friedrich Bachmann. Phenomenal stuff. It's like the hockey version of Friday Night Lights for those of you who enjoy that. So check it out. Also, a buddy just texted me while we were podcasting about a group of 8 riders that got stuck upside down on a roller coaster for hours, and somebody had to climb up and get them down. So I'm out of the roller coaster game immediately. Folks, thanks so much for checking in with us on Monday's episode of Locked On College Basketball. You can follow us on Twitter. The show's Locked On CBB. Andy is at Andy Patton CBB, and I am at Isaac Shade. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show. Smash that like button to let us know you are here. Comment on the show. Hey, as always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace.